Hello, good people, and welcome to Finest Skills Hub. Here we learn, we connect, and we grow. We continue our series on how to take advantage of the business intelligence tools in Excel to create insightful dashboards for our users. In this case study, our focus is on how to analyze columns or fields with a lot of text. So the case study we are using is an example of a restaurant manager who has sent feedback form to clients who have passed through the restaurant. Now, in the response, they will put their feedback in sentences, but there's a list of KPIs that he wants to compare to see how many times those words were mentioned in the feedback. To be able to do this, you have to use something called a Cartesian join in Power Query or Cartesian Product. So basically, we compare the two lists and then draw and highlight the words that have been mentioned a lot, create an SY scatter or bubble chart, something similar to a word cloud, so that he can see which areas need improvement. Even though this case study is on restaurants, there's a lot that you can learn to apply to your own work schedule as well. So we'll share the file with you so you can practice step by step. So if you're game, join me in Excel and let's start the process. Right, so we begin with a look at our final work. This is a very simple dashboard, right? It has some slices to help us view by gender, male or female. We can also break it down by the item ordered, right? Now, in each case, you realize that the item or the word that was mentioned a lot in the feedback is having a very big circle. Now, we can also view this by period as well. So I can go all the way till the current period. Now, this is what we want to create. So the basic idea is that we have our keywords here, okay, areas that we think would need improvement. Then we've created our form using Google Forms. So this is the back end of the Google form. So the customer indicates the gender, the date, the item ordered, and then gives us the feedback, right, in a series of sentences. So our job here is to be able to get the keywords from the sentences given and then create that interactive SY scatter bubble chart, right? That's basically the context. So the first thing that we need to do is to come to our start worksheet. Because this is our KPI, the first thing that we need to do is to create a table out of this. I can do that by going to Insert Table, okay, and then click OK. You could also use Control T as well. Then we need to name this table. So here I'll name this keywords. Now, basically we need to have this KPI and then the Google form responses all together in the same workbook. So to get the Google form, what we need to do is come to the back end, the Google Sheets, okay, and you click on share. So once you click on the share button, ensure that this is set to anyone with a link, okay, then you copy the link, okay. Now, after copying the link, you can launch any notepad or Word, okay. So I'm basically going to paste what I copied in here, okay. This is the original link. Now, we want this in Excel, but before we get this into Excel, we need to modify the link, right, using a certain script, a very simple script. It has 4 keywords. So the keywords here are export, space, format, the type of file, SL, SX, okay, and then the ID, okay. So with these keywords, we can now put it together to create a script that can bring in Excel. Now, we replace the spaces. So the first space between export and format, we'll put a question mark there, okay. Between format and then the file type, we'll put an equal sign there. Between the file type and the ID, we'll put a joiner, which is concatenate or the ampersand, right? And then we bring an equal to. So basically what we are doing here is we want to export this as an Excel file, but we need to provide the ID, right? Now that ID can be found right here. Okay, so between the D slash and then where the forward slash ends, you can copy this, Control C, okay, and then you paste this here, right? So this full script, okay, is what you are going to use. So copy this and then replace the concluding part of the original link, which starts with edit. You can now paste what you've just modified, okay. So this original link can now be used to query the Google form responses, right? So I'm going to copy this, Control C, and then I'll come to my Excel workbook, right? I'll come to data, get data, okay, from other sources, and then from web. So this is going to help me query the Google form responses directly. So I'll paste this here, and then I'll click OK. Right, so as expected, this is sheet 1, which has our Google form responses. So I'll click on transform data and then take this to Power Query. Okay, so now that we have our Google form responses in, we would bring in the KPIs. But for starters, let's name this responses. Okay, and then start a new query. So I'll right click this blank space, new query, other sources, and blank query right here. Okay, now if you have tables in your workbook or you have named ranges, you can use this simple function excel.current workbook. Okay, it scans and brings all tables. If you are using this method, ensure that all you have is the KPI table, nothing else, right? So if I press enter, you notice that it brings me the KPI table. Okay, just click on the side, you see that the content is right here. So to get access to the KPI table, I'll just click directly on the table, the name there, it expands it, and I have my KPI list. We want to do it such that we can update this and then always match it to the feedback that we have from the survey. So for this query, let's name this the dimension underscore KPI. Okay, so this will make it easier for us to identify the table. Now, we need to clean this up a bit. So what we want to do basically is just extract the first words and then take away all the further and better details in brackets. So to be able to do that, I'll go to transform, okay, under extract, I'll extract text before delimiter, right? So I'll choose text before delimiter. Now consistently, you realize that I have space and open brackets, right? Just after the words I'm looking for. So I'll use this as a delimiter, so space, open bracket, and I'll click OK. Right, so this leaves me with just the key areas for improvement. Now that we have this, this is going to serve as a dimension table. Now let's create a copy of the original responses, right? We don't want to tamper with the original one. So I'll right click this and then choose to reference, okay? So reference creates a copy but maintains connection to the original one. Okay, so this is going to be our fact table. So I'll modify this a bit and then just put facts underscore before the responses and then clean this. Okay, so I have my dimension KPIs and then my fact responses. Right, now to have a consistent case, what we're going to do is to transform this into a lowercase. So right in transform, I'll come to format and then apply this lowercase step. It reduces everything here to a lowercase. That way, if we match it to the sentences in suggested area for improvement, so let's come to suggested area for improvement, and under transform, we'll do the same thing as well. Reduce this to a lowercase, okay? So with this done, let's now bring in the KPIs or the key areas right into our fact responses query. Okay, so we are going to start a custom column. So custom columns creates additional columns based on your custom form list. Okay, so I'll come to add column, then come to custom column. Okay, I'll leave this as custom. Now basically what I need is to reference the dim KPI. Okay, so the original query that we have in there, and I'll click OK. Now because we queried this from a Google form, you have this warning, which is just to validate the data privacy issues with this. I mean, this is a generic data source, so we just continue. If you have this, just come here and then choose ignore privacy levels checks and then click save. Okay. All right, so this now loads our query. Now you notice that right against the fact responses, we've actually brought in the table, which is the dimension KPI, right? If you click on the side, every response now has all the KPIs against it. Okay, so the drinks menu could have more variety. Okay, has all the KPIs against it. Now, if we expand this, so I'm going to click on check use original column name as prefix and then click OK, right? The original response from the customers is going to be repeated as many times as the list in the KPI, right? So if you have 30 KPIs, we'll have the feedback from client 1 repeated 30 times, right? Now this is important, and this is where we need to do the Cartesian join. So we'll compare the list that we have, the expanded view, against the KPIs. Always ensure that your data type is set right. So we'll set this as text, right? It's going to be a very simple formula. So we basically want a situation where if we identify that the suggested area for improvement contains any word in the key areas or the KPI, okay, we want that word maintained. Otherwise, it should return a null. So we'll go and then create a conditional column under the add column. So create conditional column. Okay, we'll leave this as custom. So I'll come here and choose the suggested area for improvement if it contains any word from the column. So the column here is the key areas. Okay, then this should bring the key areas. Okay, so basically if the suggested area, that's the column, or the feedback from customers contains the words in the key areas or the KPI, then it should bring that word or maintain it in the row. Otherwise, this should bring us a null. And we'll click OK. Right. So if you take a close look, the drinks menu could have more variety. Right. We have menu here. We also have drinks here. Right. So in those two instances, menu and drinks are flagged. Okay. So this is what we actually need to create our SY scatter bubble chart. So with this, we can now come in here, click on the filter icon, and then take out all the nulls, and then we'll click OK. Okay, so as expected, we now have all the responses and the keywords that were mentioned in there against our KPI. Okay, so with this filtered step, we can go ahead and remove the custom step. It served this purpose. Okay, so we now have the keywords over here, and then we also have our dimension KPI. Okay, so the next step basically is to be able to combine these two and then create our data model. So we'll come to home, come to close and load, and then choose close and load to. So we are choosing close and load to because we don't want extra tables in this workbook, but we rather want to save them as connections, and then we'll add them to the data model, and then we'll click OK. Okay, so now that we have our queries loaded, truth is that all we need is the dimension table and then the fact responses, right? So we can change the load type of the original output. So I'll come to load to, selecting responses, and then uncheck add this to the data model. This way we don't see this. I'll click OK after this pops up. So this way we don't see a duplicate of the responses in the data model, but it will still update the referenced fact responses query. So these two will be our queries. At this point, let's go to Power Pivot and then examine our data model. Right, so Power Pivot is an add-in. You have to enable it. So if you are using it for the first time, you come to Data, and then you come to the Data Tools. Then you click on the data model here. It activates it, and then you can close the window. You see Power Pivot now comes in as a tab over here. So this is Power Pivot. I'll go to Manage. Now you notice that my two tables are here, the dim KPI and then the fact responses, right? This is the data view. If I come to a diagram view, I get a schema or a visual representation of these two tables. Now, we basically want to create our count of words from the fact responses and then break it down using the KPIs from here. If you want to also include dates, it's better to create a calendar table, right? So with a calendar table under design, you have the option to create a date table here. So if you do new, it scans the data you have and then creates this calendar table, which covers basically all the dates in the period. You can always update this as well, right? So this gives us two dimension tables and a fact table. So at this point, you can create a data model, which basically means we want to connect the tables, right? So I'll take date from here and then connect it to this date in the calendar. And then I'll take key areas from here and then connect it right here, right? So this is going to be the back end. This is going to be the data model where we can feed our pivot tables and stage the chart for our dashboard. So my job here is done in the data model. I'll close it, enable content. If you are prompted, click yes. Okay, so let's create a new sheet and let's call this staging. So what we are going to do is to insert a pivot table. So I'll come insert a pivot table from the data model. So I can insert a pivot table into this existing worksheet, click OK. Right, so the basic idea of the data model was to have access to all the three tables, our two dimension tables and the fact responses. Now our job here is pretty simple. We want to count the number of times the words were mentioned. So I'll go to the fact responses, locate key areas, and then drop it to the value section, right? So we have a count, that's 71 times for the period. We want to break this down by the KPIs. So we'll come to the dim KPI, okay, and then drop key areas in the row section. So this gives us a breakdown, okay. Now we can sort this. So I'll come to data, select any of the values in there, and then sort this in descending order. So this is going to be the original staging for our chart. So the next thing that we need to do is to draw the elements or fields we need to create our SY scatter bubble chart with, right? So for that, we need our labels, we need X, we need Y, and then we need our values. Now we want to make this dynamic in the sense that if the pivot table shrinks or expands, we want the staging for our chart to be dynamic as well. So to make it dynamic, we are going to use some dynamic array functions present in recent editions of Excel, right? So the first one we want to do is to bring in all the labels here, right? So to bring in the labels, I'm going to use the function filter. So filter requires an array. So that array is going to be the whole of column B. So I'm selecting B to B from the top here. So I've selected my array. I need to now bring in my criteria. The criteria basically is that in column B, so I've selected column B again. Okay, I want to return the entries that are not blank. So I'll put in less than, greater than, and then double quotes, right? So this is going to be my criteria. Okay, then I'll close my brackets. Right, so this will bring me all the entries that are present here, including the row labels. So we can take off the grand total because we really don't need it. So I'll go to the design tab and then take off the grand total. Okay, we also want to take off the labels as well. So to take off the labels, what we can do is that in this original filter, right, we want to drop the first row. The function is drop, so I will use drop, okay, on the array, and then come here and then drop the first row. So when I do this, we now have a situation where this is aligned, right? If you don't have the dynamic array functions, you can directly reference this and then drag down. The only challenge though is that it's not going to be updating. So to be able to create the bubble chart, we need the XY coordinates, right? For our X, we basically need multiples of 5 or 10, whatever number that you want, right? So if you have 0, 5, 10, you can enter manually and drag down, or we can use another dynamic array function called sequence. Okay, so for sequence, so I want to count the number of rows that we have here, okay, so that this is always synced. So I'll use a count A on the original reference. Okay, so I'll close this, skip the number of columns, and then start this at 0, moving in multiples of 5, right? So that is what I put in for sequence, and then I press enter. So this is going to give me 0 all the way to 17 multiples of 5, right? Now I'm going to use the same formula in the Y. Okay, so I'm going to copy this, Control C, come here, equal to, and paste this, and I'll get this. But if I do it this way, I'm just going to have the circles in one diagonal direction, and I don't want that. I want the Y to be random. It makes it nice when they can just take random positions. Okay, so I want to introduce a random element in the Y series. Okay, so to be able to do that, I'm going to sort by. So introduce another dynamic array function, sort by. Okay, so this is going to be my array, and then I want to sort this by another called rand array. Okay, so rand array, I'll give it the rows to sort this by. So this is going to be the rows, the original output. Okay, I'll close this bracket for rows and then close for rand array, and then finally close for sort by. Right, so when I press enter, you realize that it's still multiples of 5, but on refresh, these ones take random positions. Okay, so that's basically what I want to achieve over here. Okay, now let's go to our values. So for our values, we want to return the items in column C, which is similar to what we did in column B. Okay, so I'll just copy this formula and then paste this here, and then change this from B to C in each case. Okay, so this is going to be B to B, so this is going to be C to C, and then this is going to be C to C as well. Okay, so I've created it this way so that as your pivot table, which is the original staging, okay, expands or shrinks, this is also going to shrink as well. To even make it better, we can put all together in one dynamic array. So what I'm going to do is I'll join all these arrays together, the S, the Y, and then the values, which is needed for my SY scatter chart. So here, I'll do an equal sign, select F6, hash to go down to X, bring a colon, okay, and then go all the way to values, and also bring a hash over here, right? So this way, it joins everything in between. So I have my X, okay, my Y, and then my values. If I have it this way, I can now highlight this current range, okay, go to insert, and then insert my SY scatter bubble charts on this. Okay, so we just done this to make it dynamic. Now I'll cut this and then come and then paste this here for my final dashboard. Okay, so let's name this dashboard. Okay, so already you see the bubbles moving around. Let's clean this up a bit. So we take off the grid lines, okay, and then we take off the X and Y labels as well. All we need are just the circles. Okay, then we can select the bubbles or the circles and then press Ctrl 1, right? So Ctrl 1 will give us the format data series. We'll come to the fill icon and then open up the fill. We want to vary the colors. So when you open the fill, you have vary colors by points available here. So this will give you different colors for each bubble. Okay, now we can name this customer feedback improvement. Like I said, this is a very simple dashboard, so we will not really do a lot in terms of the mockout and layout. The essential chart is this one that we've created. Okay, so this is going to be our chart. Now let's bring in our slicers. So for our slicers, we'll go to staging. Everything is going to come from this pivot table. So I'll click on insert. Make sure you're standing in the pivot table. I'll come to slicers. I'll go to all the tables and then select gender from here, right? And then also select item ordered from here. In a typical scenario, you could also create dimension tables for these, right? But we'll stick to drawing them from the fact table. So gender and item ordered for our slicers, right? Then for our timeline, which allows us to break down by time, I'll come again to the pivot table, insert, and then we'll put in a timeline on the calendar table, right? So I'll expand this and I'll take this from the date column. Okay, so we have something like this, right? So I'll select this first one, hold Control, select the second, hold Control, select the third, cut using Control X, come to my dashboard, and then I'll paste this here. I'll paste everything. Okay, so let's now position them. I'll select the gender slicer, go to slicer, break this into 2. Okay, increase the height to about 0.5. Okay, so that is how you format this. Okay, we'll do something similar for the item ordered. So this is going to be in 3 columns. The height is going to be 0.5. Okay, then we'll resize it a bit to the right so we can see all the text fully. So this is for our item ordered. And then finally, we have our timeline over here. Okay, so all these are connected to the pivot table, which controls our SY scatter. So at this point, let's turn attention to our bubble charts. We need to label the bubbles correctly. Okay, so if I come here, I can hit the plus sign and then introduce data labels. But we'll go in and then pick some details. So I'll go to more options. So currently this is set to the Y value, right? What I rather need is the bubble size. Okay, so I'll check the bubble size and then take away the Y value. So at this point, to know the labels for each bubble, we want to take the values from a cell. Okay, so if I come to value from cells, I basically want to take it from the labels that we have here. Okay, so if I feed it this way, I can get the labels. But again, I want this to be dynamic, right? Now, you can't use the spell directly in here. So if I spell this down and I click OK, you notice that I have an error. So the way around this is to create a named range for this reference. So to create a named range, you come to formulas and then you come to name manager. Okay, so over here, you can create a new name. We'll name this labels. Okay, and then here we can reference our dynamic array. So I'll come to staging, select waiter, and then put a hash. So the idea is that it's going to go all the way to the end of the current display. Okay, and I'll click OK. So this allows us to name. We use this when we are referencing. Okay, so I'll close this. So doing this again, I'll come add labels, data labels, come to more options, right? This time around, I'll come to value from cells. So I'll put in the name range for my labels, right? Now, the thing is that if this is not in the same worksheet, you need to prefix the name with the sheet name. So I'll type staging followed by an exclamation mark for the sheet name, and then I'll put in labels. Okay, so I'll click OK. So you see that I now have my labels here. Now that we are here, we can take advantage and place the labels in the center. Okay, so we'll place it right here. You can bolden these, and then the separator, okay, under the label options, I can drop this down and then push this to the new line to use the space well. Okay, so this will give us the labels. Now let's work on the bubbles, right? So if it's displaying well, it's fine, but you can select the bubbles, press Ctrl+1, and then set it to 100. If you like, you could also set it to the width, okay, to make it a bit clearer. So these options are available for you. Okay, so essentially this brings us close to our final work, right? So the last thing that we need to do is to put in a gradient fill. So I'll select the chart, go to format, and then under shape fill, go to gradient, and then go to more gradients. Okay, so over here I can set a gradient fill to this. That is all the formatting that we need to do. Okay, so the basic learning here is how we use the Cartesian join to match the two lists, the feedback from our customers, and then our KPI list. Then we use the queries to create a data model so that we can break down by our KPIs. And then from there, our pivot table gave us the staging for our SY scatter. And then we created the dynamic staging to give us this. So there's a lot you can do with Power Query, the Power Pivot, the data model in Power Pivot, pivot tables, slices, and charts, right? If you want to do more hands-on with these tools, you can always get a copy of my book where you walk through a full case study on how to build an interactive sales dashboard. So the files have been shared with you. You can practice and then master these skills. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you in the next video. If this video was helpful,
and you would like to receive more of these videos directly on your WhatsApp, you can send ad to this WhatsApp number. We'll add you to our broadcast list so you receive our videos directly. You can also visit our YouTube channel, Finance Skills Hub. All our old videos are here. Please subscribe for notification of new videos, or connect with us on any of these social media handles. Thank you so much for watching.